Hello et bienvenue à tous dans ce 57e numéro du Rétro. Comme d'habitude, commençons en remerciant tous ceux qui soutiennent la chaîne et qui permettent de continuer la grande aventure des NBA Stories. Nous proposons un travail de recherche et d'interview de plus en plus important. Si vous appréciez ce projet et que vous souhaitez apporter votre pierre à l'édifice, sachez que vous pouvez désormais offrir un tip directement depuis YouTube en cliquant sur le cœur sous cette vidéo. Même le plus minime soutien est grandement apprécié. Merci à tous. La réalisation de cet épisode a été rendue possible grâce au nouveau partenaire des NBA Stories, Hooper. La marque s'est alliée à la chaîne pour concevoir une gamme originale qui commence à se faire de plus en plus remarquée. Découvrez ces maillots vintage sur le site de Hooper et bénéficiez de 10% de réduction en utilisant le code promo LNS10. Équipementier de référence en France, Hooper est votre partenaire pour concevoir le maillot de votre club. C'est simple, il s'occupe de tout. Design, flocage, broderie, sérigraphie. Si des centaines de clubs ont fait confiance à Hooper, c'est car ils proposent un travail made in France de qualité. Découvrez tout leur savoir-faire en vous rendant sur leur site hooperstore.fr. Nous avons aujourd'hui la chance de compter sur la participation de Roland Lazenby. L'un des écrivains sportifs les plus respectés aux États-Unis, Lazenby est notamment l'auteur de The Life, considéré comme la biographie de référence sur Michael Jordan. Cet ouvrage est disponible traduit en français. Roland Lazenby a eu la chance de côtoyer MJ et les Bulls des années 90. Nous le remercions d'avoir accepté de se confier à nous. Étant un conteur d'exception, nous avons décidé de le laisser nous raconter une grande partie du récit du joueur. Que le spectacle commence.
21 months have passed since Michael Jordan last played competitive basketball. For 21 months, the NBA was without its supreme artist. There may be many interesting peripheral aspects to both his departure and return, but at the heart of it is simply this: the best in the world is back.
Walked in this morning and shook my hand, said, it's a done deal.
One thing I kind of totally forgot, once I retired 18 months ago, was my love for the game of basketball. As much as I tried to stay away from the game, the more times that I played, the more times that my appetite got wet.
It had been this euphoric spring of 1995. Michael had come back. It was just crazy and fun to cover, exciting. The Bulls had been really good, and then they'd had a season that was good even without Michael, and then it had been not so good. And then boom, here he comes back, and it's like the biggest news story in the world, and we're going all over the place, seeing games, and the momentum is building, double nickel, all the different things of that spring of 95.
This is what this man waited for. It's what he came back for. Michael returned for the NBA playoffs for a chance to win a world championship.
Longley softened up a little bit. Ooh, speaking of softening. 1-point lead.
And Jordan spinning his way against Anderson. O'Neal with the slam. And the Orlando Magic are going to win this series over the Chicago Bulls.
I remember being in the hallway, walking down the hallway after the loss to Orlando, particularly when Jordan messed up, turned the ball over. No one knew it at the time, but he had done the same thing in high school as a senior, with his team having a lead and in the playoffs, and it was a very sensitive thing. But I walked down to the locker room. I'm very close to Tex Winter, the assistant coach of the Bulls. And this was the first time that Michael had let his team down in the playoffs. It was a big deal to come back, having been away 2 years, and to get ready. And I could see that Tex Winter was a little shaken. And Tex told me, we've told Michael he's still our guy, that we still believe in him. And Phil Jackson used the words, he showed us he has feet of clay, that while he seemed superhuman for so long, suddenly he had shown himself to be very human.
Chicago, 1995. L'impossible venait de se produire. De 1990 à 1993, les Bulls de Michael Jordan avaient prouvé être tout simplement insubmersibles. Des équipes toutes plus vaillantes les unes que les autres avaient tenté de déjouer les hommes de Chicago. Que nenni. C'est sur 3 titres consécutifs que l'idole Michael Jordan prit sa retraite de façon étonnante en 1993. Épuisé mentalement suite au meurtre de son père, MJ croyait avoir dit adieu au basketball cette année-là. Au fond de lui, l'arrière devait le savoir. On n'oublie jamais son premier amour. Après une timide tentative du côté du baseball, Michael Jordan fit donc son grand retour en 1995. Chicago avait connu des hauts et des bas en l'absence de son joueur vedette. Pour beaucoup, le retour de Jordan dans l'effectif plaça donc instantanément les Bulls comme favoris au titre. Oui mais voilà, revenir dans l'arène de la NBA après presque 2 ans de pause n'est pas chose facile. En face des Bulls en playoff se trouvait le très jeune et surtout très en forme Orlando Magic du phénomène Shaquille O'Neal. Lorsque Chicago se fit éliminer par les Floridiens en demi-finale des playoffs 1995, la planète du basketball se demanda à l'unisson. Et si le règne de Michael Jordan était du passé? Lui qui avait martyrisé toutes les équipes de la ligue en finale. Et si ce super-héros s'était rangé parmi le commun des mortels? 2 ans après le décès de son père, l'atmosphère était lourde autour de Michael Jordan. Comme rarement, les mauvaises langues avaient enfin matière à le critiquer allègrement. Et comme vous vous en doutez certainement, le numéro 23 prit cela personnellement.
As Michael was coming back, the other tremendously emotional thing that would play into the fall is that from the murder of his father, the charges against the 2 young men who were accused of murdering James Jordan, those things were being adjudicated and starting to be adjudicated in the courts. And so it was a weird situation. The sports media were there to ask sports questions. And it was understood that you didn't come into a sports media session and start asking Michael about the case, about the murderers of his father. You weren't going to bring that into his media sessions for basketball. But it was almost like we were oblivious to all of this anger building in Michael. So there was sort of in that period going into that next training camp the next fall, there was all this anger that nobody really saw. You had to be really dialed in up close to see Michael's tremendous anger.
Are you as good now as you were when you left?
I'm better from a mental aspect, you know, because I approach it as a mature basketball player from both rims, you know, from offense to defense, from a mental aspect, not just physically. I mean, physically, I may not be able to take off from the free throw line, yeah, but I may not have to.
Nous sommes donc à l'orée de la saison 1995-1996 et la question était sur toutes les lèvres. Était-ce la fin de la dynastie des Chicago Bulls de Phil Jackson et Michael Jordan? Pour Jerry Krause, le controversé mais ô combien impactant general manager de l'équipe, hors de question de s'avouer vaincu.
We don't consider our season a success unless we're playing in June. That means you're in the finals. And we certainly, that's what we aim for. We dictate our season towards that.
Si souvent distordant, Jerry Krause et Michael Jordan étaient exactement sur la même longueur d'onde à l'approche de la saison 1995-1996. Plus déterminé que jamais, Jordan reprit son costume de leader à l'attitude quasi dictatoriale. Pour les joueurs arrivés avant le retour de MJ, comme Steve Kerr, il était temps de se tenir à carreau.
But a lot of the new teammates on the Bulls, it's like Steve Kerr would explain to me, we didn't know Michael, we were intimidated. Steve Kerr talked about, you know, when he appeared in practice the previous March, it was like, here's this god of basketball, and you know, we're these guys that have just come into the Bulls in the last year while he was away, and they weren't even sure what to say to him. The real rocket fuel for the Bulls in the fall of '95 was all of this accumulated anger that Michael Jordan had, and he brought that into training camp, and it was like, and that's when he punched Steve Kerr over a silly practice fight. And
goes off and hits me in the chest. and I just haul off and hit him right at the eye. And Phil just throws me out of practice.
He was not just intimidating in appearance. That punch, that made him intimidating physically. That physicality became a reality. And he was angry about his father. He was angry about the previous season's playoffs. He was so angry, and this all just sort of wound up in him like a mainspring. He was tough on teammates all the time anyway. He was a very fierce guardian of the team mindset. And that was his way. He knew how to say things and do things, and he didn't hesitate to say and do things with teammates. You know, a lot of professional athletes are all getting paid. You know, it's rare where you have somebody sort of come in and just take over the whole mindset of the team. But that's what Steve Kerr said he told me that Jordan did that fall of '95. He just sort of came in and took over the entire team mindset. All of this anger, all of this determination to come back and reassert that he was indeed the dominant figure in the NBA. This is Michael Jordan. He doesn't care. He's willing to get in everybody's face and say and do everything he needs to do. And he will punch every button he has to punch. He will say things that are deeply personal. He will do anything he needs to do to elevate you. And he tested himself constantly, but he really tested his teammates. And when I finally got to sit down and ask him about this, I said, you know, you got a, and no one knew this at the time. And I said, you've got a very, very difficult, almost nasty style of leadership. And he looked at me and said, yes, I can be hard, but I'm not hard on people just to be hard. I have to find out if they have the mental and emotional strength to be with me on the floor in those big moments when the pressure is insane. Are they going to be able to stand up to that, or are they going to wilt? And it had been a property of those Jordan Bulls, especially as they got into the 90s. And Jerry Krause, when I would talk with him, the general manager, he would complain. He would say, I would bring people in and I would think they were strong enough to stand up to Michael. But there were guys that would come in, they just could not take being on the team with Michael Jordan. They could not take the way he challenged them, pro player to pro player.
Alors, on prend les mêmes et on recommence? Pas tout à fait. Lors de l'intersaison 1995, les Bulls décidèrent d'un pari étonnant. Malgré son énergie sur les cours, le vieillissant Dennis Rodman était perçu comme un élément perturbateur et en fin de parcours en NBA. Mentalement fragile, Rodman sortait d'un passage très compliqué du côté des San Antonio Spurs. Pour beaucoup, il semblait bien que l'ailier fort était désormais plus intéressé par les couvertures de magazines et les soirées arrosées que le basketball. Bien qu'étant un choix risqué, les Bulls savaient que les qualités au rebond de Rodman pouvaient être précieuses pour améliorer l'effectif. En effet, depuis le départ d'Horace Grant, Chicago avait une carence certaine au poste 4. Joindre le feu follet Dennis Rodman au maniaque Michael Jordan. Voilà l'étonnant pari que décidèrent les Bulls.
They said, Dennis, you want to come play for the Bulls? I said, I don't care, whatever, what's up?
Dennis, who was already pretty troubled by 95, 96, as I said. He had come to Chicago bankrupt. He had had some serious emotional moments in Detroit that led to him leaving the team and ending up in San Antonio. And so he didn't mix well with David Robinson and was available for the Bulls. And it was a move that the Bulls scouting staff suggested to Jerry Krause, and Krause liked it and they did it. In the fall of '94, you know, when he was just starting to get all the tattoos. And he was a very, I don't want to say low key. He was an eccentric guy, but he had some troubles, obviously, in Detroit. He was a big part of those Detroit teams. But then he went to San Antonio, and Dennis and David Robinson were never much on the same page. And Dennis, you know, he was going to Vegas and shooting $50,000 craps and just throwing away his money. And by the fall of '95, when the Bulls were considering bringing him in, he was bankrupt. But he came to Chicago, and immediately the city of Chicago just went gaga over Dennis Rodman. And suddenly he had $15 million in off-the-court deals for sponsorships and various things. And Bill Smith, the Bulls team photographer, started going with him to all the Chicago bars. And Bill was taking all the photographs, and women all across Chicago took up this thing where they would pull up their shirts and show Rodman their breasts.
Of all the off-season moves in the NBA, none got more attention than San Antonio's trade of Dennis Rodman to the Chicago Bulls. The planet's best rebounder is also one of its most eccentric characters, and therein lies the dilemma for those who have dealt with the worm.
I'd known Dennis for years doing work with the Pistons, and Dennis was operating on rocket fuel his entire career.
Feeding Robert Horry and blocked by Dennis Rodman. Inside. Sealed by Pippen, top pass, and Rodman.
No question. The energy he brought, the offensive rebounding, the fact that he could produce extra possessions just with the way he could rebound. The craziness, he really hit it off with Phil Jackson.
What makes Dennis run?
I guess Dennis Rodman.
Dennis was a sweet soul. He was the kind of guy who connected with, you know, the guy picking up towels in the locker room. Dennis would pretty soon was getting on a plane with some of the young white guys on the team and going to Pearl Jam concerts. He was a huge Pearl Jam fan, and Dennis was, he didn't really fit any categories. He was a good person. He had some alcohol problems. He was well-intentioned. He had some genius for promotions.
The biggest show on earth.
Oh, it's like the Beatles have arrived on the scene. His first man, Jordan having trouble getting across. Quick pressure, finds Pippen. That's right.
Jordan, the Bulls came in for Magic's second game back, and they just eviscerated them. It was embarrassing. The Bulls were embarrassing lots and lots of people that season.
All alone, thinking about the shot, thinking about driving. Now drives down to the right side, goes up to the left hand. It's good. Tip, Tony with the tip, Tony. Michael, to the line out, finish it. Spencer and Jordan picked it off. Behind the back, Pippen. Oh, yes, sir.
You still set the standard for greatness, determination, and leadership. Congratulations, 1995-96 NBA Most Valuable Player.
Avec un Michael Jordan au sommet de son art, entouré de Scottie Pippen et Dennis Rodman, les Bulls réalisèrent ni plus ni moins que la meilleure saison régulière de l'histoire de la NBA. 72 victoires pour 10 petites défaites. Personne ne pouvait stopper l'équipe de Chicago qui continua sa croisade en playoff. Après s'être débarrassé plutôt facilement du Heat et des Knicks, Jordan prit sa revanche contre le Magic en le laminant 4-0. Tout était rentré dans l'ordre. Les Bulls étaient de retour chez eux en finale NBA. Lors de l'édition 1996, Michael Jordan devait se défaire d'un adversaire tout aussi cinglant et déterminé. Gary Payton et ses Supersonics détonnants.
Shot left to Payton, ahead to Hawkins, has a step on Mutombo, Kemp trailing, he will take it! And Askew the rebound. Look out, look out! Sets up, out ahead to Kemp. Temple run across midcourt, dribbled by Johnson to the cup. Thundering overhead!
Une finale qui déchaîne les passions. Il y a Jordan, il y a Rodman, il y a Pippen, il y a Sean Kemp ici. Ce sont deux équipes spectaculaires, ce sont deux équipes, il y a Gary Payton également, élu défenseur de l'année. Ce sont deux équipes qui sont les deux meilleures de la saison régulière. Chicago a battu tous les records avec 72 victoires pour 10 défaites, mais Seattle a été pas mal non plus avec 64 victoires pour 18 défaites.
The Sonics were led by Gary Payton and coached by George Karl. The Sonics were a very good defensive team. And so some people were thinking, you know, the Bulls hadn't won a championship in a few years, and they were thinking the Sonics would be a good test, and they were. And there were all kinds of things going on. You know, George Karl was a University of North Carolina guy. He, like Jordan, had played at the University of North Carolina, and that's sort of a fraternity. And they have some of that back and forth going on, but George Karl was probably joking a little too much, and that really helped feed Michael. Also going on was that Gary Payton wanted to really take on the Jordan challenge. And he and George Karl weren't on the same page about how Jordan should be played.
72 wins, you know, all the consecutive winnings, games that we have won, but by no means do we want to do all that and then be the team that lose to the Seattle Supersonics in the finals. And I'm pretty sure that'll be marked in history too. So that's one side of history we certainly don't want to be a part of. And I think that's part of the motivation for a lot of the guys, especially myself, to try to get this thing done.
Johnson come across that lane and smash that ball through the hoop. Jordan getting right to it and continues to play perfect basketball. Against Payton. Goes to the fadeaway.
It was, you know, I went to Seattle for the finals. It was great fun. I went out there expecting rain, the typical Seattle stuff, but it was just beautiful weather and just a glorious time in the development of American basketball to have that championship series. Ron Harper had a hat that he had a saying, "It don't mean a thing without the ring." And the Bulls had run up this glorious all-time regular season record. And so they had hats made up, "Don't mean a thing without the ring." And so the Sonics presented a challenge, but ultimately they really weren't able to fully contend with those Bulls that were driven by Michael Jordan's anger.
Of the championship trophy.
Who would have ever written this this season? You know, no one predicted it as much as you guys tried to be predictors. You know, we couldn't have predicted it early, but things work in mysterious ways.
Whenever you're expected to do something, the pressure is great on a basketball club. It's a relief to win rather than a exaltation. So tonight was kind of a relief and a celebration because we knew we were good enough to win. We just had to put that nail in the coffin and close the lid of this series.
I don't know who got the MVP or not, but Dennis Rodman won them 2 basketball games.
You know, he's disruptive, he's everything, but I came back and proved everyone wrong.
La légende de Michael Jordan et des Bulls peut s'écrire dans de nombreux volumes. Mais pour beaucoup, s'il ne devait rester qu'un seul chapitre, ce serait bien celui de la saison 1995-1996. En plus de conclure le meilleur exercice comptable de l'histoire, Chicago proposa un incroyable spectacle sur les cours qui émerveilla des générations. 20 ans plus tard, les Warriors d'un certain Steve Kerr brisèrent à nouveau ce record en ne perdant que 9 matchs de la saison. La question se pose alors, laquelle de ces deux équipes se doit d'être considérée comme la meilleure de l'histoire?
I think it was at the time, but the game changed dramatically after that. You know, the game played today is not the game then. And the timeline is different, the rules are different. Back then, the Bulls had their triangle offense. It was a brilliant offense, and it was just beautiful to watch them play. And there was no player like Jordan. The Warriors, of course, broke that record of those Bulls in 95, 96, but those Warriors did not win the championship.
Et oui, la différence capitale entre les Bulls 96 et les Warriors 2016, les premiers furent sacrés champions, les seconds non. Voilà tout ce qui rend la légende de Michael Jordan si singulière. Que l'on aime ou non son caractère, chaque fois qu'il se hissa en finale face à des adversaires de poids, il ne dérogea jamais à ses obligations. Dans la grande carrière de l'artiste Michael Jordan, 1996 est sans aucun doute sa plus belle toile.